Okay, and welcome to the second installment this week in the advertising class. And today we are going to embark upon a very different type of adventure because I'm going to choose a new program that I think you might find useful, especially if you wanted to do some work in things like banner ads. Now, this isn't necessarily the program that is currently industry standard. It may not even be the best way to do it, but it is a way to get you to understand multimedia and how to approach something like this. And one of the reasons why we like this program is that it creates nice little self-contained animations that can be used in a number of contexts. And so we're talking about making the animated banner ad. So a banner ad, like we said before, is a little tiny piece of internet real estate or screen real estate, let's say, that is in some ways animated. It does something. It moves around. It doesn't move around in place, but it may have images that change and even options, for example, words, text. So we're going to talk about how one would go about doing that. So the interactive ads, as we said last time, many banners are based on images. They're just still images. You can do it that way, and that may be the right way to do it at times. But if you have a still image on one hand and an animation on the other, which one do you think is going to attract more attention? People tend to follow movement. When we look at something, if something is not moving, we don't notice it. If something is moving, we might say, hey, what's that? What's going on over there? And so this is one way of making your ad stand out a little bit. Now, it's possible to add motion using self-contained animation, which is what we're talking about. Some image files can do this. If you're using, for example, an animated GIF, that will act like a flip book. Usually that is not the best way to do it, even though some animated GIFs have worked out rather well. They're typically not very efficient, and they don't have any interactivity. There's no logic to them. They just basically run, and they basically just sit there. So it can also be done using various coding scripts, and that goes back to what I was saying about HTML or the HTML code not always being HTML. It also includes programs like JavaScript or other things that cause things to happen. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's probably one of the more efficient ways of doing it. But it's not the sort of thing that the average person would be able to work with, and in some ways it can be rather cumbersome. And one of the most efficient programs that I've used was a program that was called Flash, is now called something else, which we'll get into, and it is currently an Adobe product, but it can still do some of these basic things pretty well. So Flash, which is no longer Flash, was acquired by Adobe not too long ago. And when Adobe acquires something, it Adobeizes it. So it's no longer quite what it used to be. But at the same time, they've kept some of the functionality. Now, Flash, which is now called Animate, created self-contained apps that would be called by HTML. So HTML is a web page code. So if you have a web page that normally calls an image, for example, along with the text, it could call instead one of these little self-contained images or self-contained apps created by Flash, and that would perform this function. And those work very well in relation to the banner ad systems we were talking about before. Now, Flash apps could be referenced like images, and so that's one of the reasons why I liked them. They were very easy to use, plus they couldn't be damaged, or not easily anyway. It would, if you had a whole collection of little images that had to be called individually, if one of them's not there, the whole thing doesn't work. In Flash, you have one application, so once it's loaded, it's loaded. Okay, coding requirements were handled on the program end, so you could program this app to be bandwidth thin, a little bit more aggressive, and all kinds of other things. And the programming could also be incredibly elaborate. You could make entire websites based on this. And it would be amazing what you could do. You could change languages and things like that. It was actually amazing. And since then, these apps have become bandwidth heavy. When Adobe got hold of Flash, it wasn't quite as streamlined as it used to be. And so in many ways, that's one of the reasons why Flash has kind of fallen out of favor and sort of been replaced with more of the Java applications, which we wouldn't be able to teach in this course. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why are we even talking about this? The idea is we want to be able to make a nice self-contained piece of screen real estate that will do what you want it to do, and not necessarily just sit there and say, I'm an ad, look at me. So that's what we're talking about here. It's logic driven. You can literally program it. You can design it. And so that's actually fun. And it's interactive, or at least it can be. You could even put a button on the thing if you want to. We won't necessarily go that far, but I'd like to show you how you could consider different ways of doing this. And it's customizable. You can make it any way you want. You can make it any size you want as long as it fits one of the parameters and so forth. Now, how are we going to do this? How we're going to do this is, first of all, we're going to go back to design principles. You have to design a piece of screen real estate. You're going to be given the frame, or you're going to choose the frame. There's a few that you can choose from. Once you've chosen what kind of an image you want to make it. Make the frame, and then basically customize everything to that size. You have to know the size before you can start doing it. And you've got to format images. If you're going to use images, basically you make sure those images are converted properly to whatever shape you want them to be in. And then, of course, your storyboard. Which image comes first? Which image comes second? And is there going to be something in between the images? Those are things that you can decide. And, of course, apply animation. And so that's easier than it sounds. And we'll talk about that when we talk about keyframes. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. But I also have a little reference note that I put up here because this contains the specifications of various banner images. So I want to go over those again. I'll start with a medium rectangle. The medium rectangle would be 300 by 250. Now those are pixels. A pixel is a very small element, of course. So 300 by 250 would be a very small image, even though it's called a medium rectangle. And 336 by 280 would be a large rectangle, which isn't really very large either. Leaderboard would be 728 by 90. That would be a long, thin rectangle. And 300 by 600 would be a half page. And of course, 320 by 100 would be very small. That will be a large mobile. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the half page. I'm going to highlight that one. I want to make a half page banner ad. And so that is going to be 300 by 600. So that is going to be 300 wide by 600 tall. So for that reason, I'm going to go over here to Photoshop and I'm going to make a new image. And basically what I'm going to tell it to do is I'm going to go 600 height, 300 width. And so that gives us this. So this is our image. And so everything that we do has to fit in that little screen, which may not necessarily be easy. So here are a series of images that could possibly be used for a travel brochure. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to dazzle people with some exotic places. Whether these are exotic or not is another matter. But the problem is these images are kind of squarish, whereas this is going into a vertical rectangle. So some of these may not be conducive to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open all of them. So I'm going to grab all of them and open. And so you see, here they are. So now they show up on the screen. And if I look at this one, to recompose that as a narrow rectangle might be possible. Now let me show you a trick by which you can do this. Now your marquee tool is over here. It's the second tool there. Now if I draw a box, you can see I can make that box any size I want. And right now what I want to do is I want to make that box tell me this. I want that box to correspond to this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my properties. Once you've got the tool selected, your properties show up here. Now notice there's something under style that says normal. Now if I pull down this, I can do fixed size or fixed ratio. Now you may be tempted to go with a fixed size, but that might not work for you. Let me show you why. If I go with fixed size, right now that's 64 pixels by 64 pixels. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to go, that'd be 300 pixels wide, and this one would be 600. Okay, so the moment I've done that, I get this. Now notice that's a problem because that is literally 300 by 600 pixels. And so I cannot include anything in there that's taking up more room. So I could get a sailboat and that's about it. But the problem is what I want to do is I want to basically take the whole image and fit it into that rectangle without distorting it. So instead of doing it that way, I'm going to change this to fixed ratio. When I do that, then it will allow me to make any rectangle that I want. Well, before I do that, why don't I go ahead and put the ratio in. So the width would be, again, 300, and the height would be 600. I could also have simply said 3 by 6, and it would still have worked. Because remember, it's a ratio. So there is my ratio. So if I wanted to include the whole image, I can basically favor this, which gives me the sailboat over here. Or I could possibly center the sailboat, or something like that. Or going over there. I'm thinking that this is the best dynamic. So I got the sailboat there, the rock, I can see the wave. And so let's say I want to do that. I go up here and do image, crop, and that is my new image. And that could be a lot worse. So then what I'm going to do is I'm then going to change the size. Image size. And remember, that has to be exact. So under the width, I'm going to put in 300. Now notice it automatically fills in that second value because I have basically forced it to. I have given it that ratio, so whatever 300, that's going to be 600 pixels. So there it is. And so notice how small it gets, which is okay. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to put this here. And I'm going to call this, actually I'm going to make a new folder for it. And I'm going to say finished. And in there, I'm going to say beach, which is probably close enough. And I'm going to make it kind of medium is fine. And so there's my first image. Now, if I close that, because I don't really need it anymore, let's say I go to this other one. I'm going to do that one too real quick. So I still have my marquee, and let's see what I can do with it. If I were to put that rectangle in place, wow, I've managed to capture most of it. I'm going to move it over just a little bit so we can get a sense of the sky there. But I would say that's pretty good. So if I do a crop, there we go. And then I can save that image, save as, and I'll put here, and that will be beach 2. Now we don't have to use all of these because some of them may not be conducive to what we're doing, but we'll go ahead and give it a try. So there it is, and again I'll set that a little lower, and then I'll do the image size because I want to make that nice and small. So the width will be 300 by 600, and then I'll just go ahead and save this, save as, and then that will be, oh, I guess I did that twice. So I'm going to save it over itself, and there it is. Okay, and I'll close that off. And what about this one? This one I'm going to reject because if I were to take my marquee tool and I were to do a rectangle, I'm just not sure I'm seeing a picture there that I like. And that's okay because I have plenty of other images. So I'm going to get rid of that one and go over here. And I'm going to say I'm going to reject this one too. Because once again, if I take my marquee tool, I suppose I could get that in there, but I really don't like it. I don't see a dynamic going on. If I put it over here, you know, maybe that, but then it's cut off. And so Goodbye, Arch. And how about this one? You know what? No. Okay, so if I look at the images that we did choose, you've only got 2, but in this case, we really don't need any more than that. And so there's 1, and there's 2. So they're both beach pictures, and let's say it's going to be a simple banner that's going to go from one beach picture to another and maybe advertise something like vacation getaways or something like that. In fact, we'll even do 2 of them. So let's say we go over here and we're going to use this to basically put together our sales pitch. So there's our palette, and what I'm going to want to do, I'll make it simple this time. So I'm just going to grab my little text tool down here. So I'm going to grab my text tool, but before we do that, I'll look up here. Times New Roman is fine, and I will make that nice and small because it probably will start out with it small anyway. So the other thing is, obviously I've got to have a color that we can see. So let's go ahead and choose kind of a deep blue on white. And there we see that we're a little bit large. Remember, we're dealing with a small space here. Actually, it's 150 points, so that would be very large. So I'm going to take that down to 12 points. Oh, maybe bigger than that. So, oh, bigger still. Almost there. And maybe, well, let's start with that. V. Vacation. Vacation getaways. And let's say we want to advertise a sale. Vacation getaways. And let's say I'll call this book now. Book now for summer. And I'm going to move that up a little bit. So I can move that up. So this is the second layer here. And I'm going to go ahead and make that text the same color, or at least roughly, as the other. So I make that a nice blue. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it probably should be close. Okay, so this will be another one of our slides. Vacation getaways, book now for summer. And I'm going to make one more, and this will be 600. That would be 300. And I'm just going to have one more little piece of text there. Actually, that's fine. It's giving me this fake text here. And I'm just going to say 40% off. 40% off. And we can even afford to make that bigger. So I'm going to go here, grab my text tool once again, and I'm going to make that, in fact, I'll just go ahead and make that, see how big I can get it, 40% off. So here, I'm going to grab that top part and make it even bigger, say 150. 40% off. Because remember, this is a small image. And believe it or not, in this case, we don't even need the exclamation point. And so there becomes your second slide. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this one. And I'm going to save this as. And I'm in Finish now. Now notice it's trying to save it as a PSD. I'm going to save that as a JPEG, just like I did the other one. And that one's going to be, I'm going to call this Pitch 1. Pitch 1. boom, and then I'll go over here, and I don't actually have to save this, and I will save this as, and JPEG, and now that becomes pitch 2. And boom, there it is. So then, if we look at this, we've got one image, got two images, and we've got vacation getaways, book now for summer, and we've got 40% off. And so we get to decide what order we put them in. So I'm going to start with this image, move over to vacation getaways, go back to that image, and 40% off. So we'll start with that plan and see how it goes. And here I'm at the startup screen, and if you look at your Adobe stuff, if you've got the Creative Suite, the Creative Cloud installed, this is the program, Adobe Animate. If you haven't got that installed, you might want to install it, and that's the program that we're going to be talking about. Okay, so this is what the Adobe Animate program starts with. This is the splash screen, so to speak. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file. And we're already given the most critical details here. Now, first of all, it's got 600 by 300, 315, so it's almost exactly right out of the box. So, oh, I'm wrong. That's backwards. So I'm going to make that 300 by 600. And so that will make the final product match the images we've done so far, and vice versa. Now, because we're talking animation, it also gives you the opportunity to choose a frame rate, and what it's defaulted to is 30 frames a second. Now, because we're doing an internet ad, you might want to take that down to like 18 or something like that, if you want to, but we're not going to bother with that right now. In real life, it may be necessary to do that because it may cut some corners on bandwidth. But right now, we'll just go ahead and stick with the basics. And so I'm going to hit Create. And there I am. There is my space. Now let me say something about this program. First of all, this program has some similarities to other programs you may use. It works in layers, but it also has a timeline, starting from one frame on to wherever it is you want to go. And so it plays like a movie. Now that doesn't mean every movie has to contain motion. It does get a little confusing if you think of it that way, but it's basically every element in it can have its own timeline, but we're still, once again, going to keep it pretty simple. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to establish this first layer, and I'm going to name that because it's a little easier to keep track of these things if you name them. So if I double click on that, I'm just going to call this, let's say, Beach 1. So that's going to be where the first image appears. Now this white area is the only thing that will ever be visible. If something's outside of that square, the user doesn't see it. But fortunately, our images are designed to fit exactly in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop an image there. But there's a little bit of a process to do that that's going to make a little bit less sense. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import the picture. So I'm going to import. I have the option here of importing it to Stage or Library. I find it easier just to go right to the Stage. So here I am in my finished pile, and I'm going to grab the first beach picture. I'm not sure the image is messed up, but we'll go ahead and grab that. And so if I'm leading with that picture, there it is. Now I'm going to move the picture so that it's on the window. Now here's the important part. Right now the program sees this as a bitmap. And a bitmap is just part of the background. It can't do much with that. So I have to convert this to what's called a symbol. A symbol can be manipulated. We'll see what I mean by that in a minute. So if I right-hand click and I go to Convert to Symbol, which is way down here, I'm going to have this dialog box here, and I'm going to make sure that we're consistent. I'm going to call that Beach 1. So this is where it's going to live, on that layer. It's going to be a movie clip. You don't have to get any more complicated than that. And I hit OK. So now, if I go to the library, I see that the library now has a symbol called Beach 1. Looks like a little gear there. But it also recognizes it as a bitmap. So the bitmap is part of the symbol. And so if I were to move this around, let's say, and I were to delete it, now it's no longer part of the composition. If I bring it back, that's a symbol, not the bitmap, even though the symbol contains the bitmap. And so the reason why we do that is because we want to be able to animate this. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assume that this is completely visible when the user sees it. So if we look over here, this is the timeline. So this is the animation part of it. We want that to be there consistently for about 1 second before anything happens. So you notice that this little dot here in frame 1, that's called a keyframe. Now right now that's the only keyframe in the whole thing. If I go all the way to frame 30 and I highlight that frame, I'm going to right-hand click and I'm going to insert another keyframe. Insert keyframe. Now what that does, if I go from here to here, that image is there. Now if I go beyond that, it may not be. It doesn't want to show me what's beyond it. But that symbol is there. So what I want it to do after that, I want this to disappear. So I'm going to give it 5 frames to do that. So if I go to frame 35 and insert another keyframe, then there we are. If I go to properties, I can see a number of things. So what I want to do is I want to go to the style area, color effect, because really that's as simple as it's going to be. You can do some of these other ones another time. All I want to do is take the alpha down. So the alpha, that basically just makes it go away. All right, so right now it's set to 0. Notice I can change the alpha like this. So alpha at 0 means it's not there. So we're gonna leave it at that. Then if I go down here, if I move off that frame, it's there again. So from this keyframe to this keyframe, it goes from full force to nothing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to blend those. So if I go into that space there and right-hand click on it, I'm going to tell it to create a tween. Create classic tween is probably the best way to do it. So what a tween is, and if this goes back to the days of animation, when Walt Disney was drawing Mickey Mouse, he would draw a picture of what Mickey Mouse started to do, then he would draw a picture of what Mickey Mouse ended doing, and then he would give it over to people he called tweeners, who would basically draw all of the pictures in between one and the other that would create that effect. So here we have computers doing that. So our picture disappears. Now at this point, I'm going to show you what happens if you were to export this as an app. Now, fortunately, this program is very simple. I'm going to, in this regard it is anyway, I'm going to name this file, first of all. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to save it in the same area we got the other stuff. And I'm going to call this vacation. So now the actual file exists that has all this stuff in it. And then if we hit Control Enter, then we get this. And this is what it's actually going to look like. Now right now, it's basically operating like a flip book that's gone crazy. It hangs out there for a second, then it flickers out, then it comes back, because it's always going back to the beginning again. So what we want to do is we want to have this do something useful. So here, I'm going to add a layer to this. And so I click on this here, adds a layer. And it doesn't really matter which order I put them in, but I'm going to put the beach layer on top. And so now we're looking down here. So this layer, I'm going to call pitch 1. Pitch 1. And so pitch 1 happens to start there at the beginning, but I don't really need to see pitch 1 until I get all the way over here. So I'm going to insert a keyframe there. So right now that keyframe on that layer is pitch 1. Now I won't be able to see that layer because I'm looking down through this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to temporarily block this layer. So see where the little eye is? I'm going to poke it in the eye and make it go away. So right now I'm seeing through that layer as if it isn't there. And so I'm going to go ahead and import the next image. So import to stage once again. And I'm going to go with this one. There it is. And I don't want to import it as a sequence. So there. Vacation getaways. And I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to convert to symbol. And this one will now be, we'll call it pitch 1. And so if I go to the library, pitch 1 now is a symbol. So I'm going to leave that alone. And so in this particular case, I'm going to kind of do the opposite of what I did here. I'm going to make another keyframe exactly where that other one is on top. Make another keyframe. And so here, I'm going to go back to this one and make sure I'm looking at this. And then I'm going to go to properties, and I'm going to go ahead and go to alpha and block it out. It's automatically defaulted to 0 and does the same thing it did the last time. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to create a classic tween. And so if I play this by moving the playhead, and so right now you'll see it kind of fades up. Now if I were to turn the other one back on, you see how that works now? And so then, let's say I want that to play for a second. So I add yet another keyframe over here. Insert keyframe. And so that plays for a second. And you can see how it plays up until that frame. And so I'm going to go here. And again, 5 frames in, I'm going to right-hand click and insert a keyframe. And then this time, I'm going to go there. And once again, do my alpha. And right-hand click there. And make that a classic tween. So then, there we go. Now, another layer. And this one we're going to call Beach 2. And again, I want that on the bottom. And I don't want to see that until it gets to this point, so I'm going to insert a keyframe there. And I'm going to turn these off so that they're not visible. I'm also going to lock them so I don't accidentally mess with them. So from there, I'm going to insert or import to stage Beach 2. And there it is. I put Beach 2 there. Right hand click, and I'm going to convert to symbol. And I'm going to call this Beach 2. It's a movie clip. And there it is. And then on this frame, insert another keyframe. Right hand click. Classic tween. And of course there I forgot to change this. So I go there and I make sure that I put my alpha down. So let's see if it figured it out. Yeah, it did. And so here I'm going to reverse that actually. Here I want alpha up. So there it is. And for this first one here, I want alpha down. And so the tween now works. And so then, of course, you can turn those back on. And we get back up here. And let's say we take that one to 90. Insert another keyframe. And so forth. I'm just going to put the last one in here. So we go to 95. Insert a keyframe. And that one, we just bring our alpha down. And there's our classic tween. And then we're just going to bring in our board. So if I then make one more layer, because I think I'm only going to need one more, and that one will be pitch 2, and that'll be on the bottom. So then I knock these out. For this one, insert keyframe, and that will be import to stage, and that will be pitch 2, 40% off. Not quite on there. And I'm going to convert that to a symbol, and that will be pitch 2. And of course, over here, we'll make that second keyframe, and we're going to take the alpha down, make that a classic tween. And we'll take that to 120. Insert keyframe. And so here we're in kind of a unique position. I'm going to turn these on. Let's see what we got so far. So if I hit Control Enter, we see we got our slideshow going. And for some reason, the last one isn't playing very long. Let me just make sure I didn't do something wrong. So that's, oh, I did do something wrong. So if I were to make that invisible, I made the tween go backwards. Okay. And one of the reasons I'm showing you this, by the way, is to show you that it's not always, some of the mistakes that you make are the tedious ones. So I'm going to go back to alpha, and I'm going to turn that down. And so then once I've done that, and I hit the Control Enter, you see, and that's right again. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is I want to go back to the first image. Even though it kind of snaps back to it, I want it to kind of go back more gracefully. And so way the heck up here on beach 1, I'm just going to go up to the timeline here, and I'm going to create another keyframe. And so there, let's say I go up to 25, and I create another keyframe. And so I'm going to unlock that layer because I'd previously locked it. And even though I can't see it, I know it's there. And I'm going to turn the alpha up. So I'm telling it that at 120, if something's going to happen, then I'm going to change to this. And so if I go to Classic Tween, there it is. So then once it's there, it's going to loop back to the beginning, which is where we want it to go. So if I hit Control Enter now, see there is our animation. And it's not perfect. You can tweak it. You can move the fades in and out or things like that. But there it is. And that is something that you could turn in. So the last thing I'm going to show you here is where this is. Now notice we've got our vacation FLA file, which is still a Flash file. Now notice vacation.swf, that is the part that you actually see. Now the actual SWF file is only 172 kilobytes, which isn't very big, but it still may be heavy for the internet. But let's see what happens if I double click on that. And allow blocked content, okay. So it opens it up in a web browser. And it shows you this is what it would look like. And so in the context of a web page, you could do this. And so this is what I want you to contemplate doing. You don't necessarily have to do an animated version of this if you don't want to, but it is available. And this is as far as I'm going to go into the code. And so that is internet advertising in a nutshell and some of the potential that you have.